All right, and we're back with episode 5 of Fantasy Talk. Today I have with me a Solitary Llama, previously of Cloth 5, and Lynn of Gold Per 10, and both writers on Fantasy Rift now. Today what we're going to be talking about is the matchups going into Week 3. This is kind of a big week just because we've played basically half of all of the matchups. So while it might seem like you have a good idea of how the teams are playing, because some teams have had really easy schedules so far, and some teams have had really hard schedules so far, it's a little bit harder to judge what teams are going to do well. We're going to be talking mostly about the matchups to watch going into next week that will really determine how the league progresses. As a reminder, go ahead and submit any questions you have to the Twitch chat during the show, and we'll go ahead and answer those questions at the end. Anyway, I think we're just going to go ahead and jump straight into featured matchups. I'm going to go ahead and start with a Solitary Llama. What is your big matchup for Europe to watch, and why?
For Europe, my big matchup's going to be SK versus Elements. These two teams are in the top 3 of Europe right now, so it's probably going to be a good game just to watch. And then you also have the bot lanes there. You have Reckless and Nif versus Forgiven and Rated. Forgiven has yet to die, and he's played 4 games and he has not died, and it's not like he's not participating in fights. He's getting a ton of kills. He's getting everybody has him on fantasy, ton of points. And when you think of an AD carry that doesn't die, you usually think of Reckless, really. And so you have Forgiven kind of taking Reckless's title right now, and you have these two matching up. I'd really like to see that matchup and see how that plays out.
Yeah, definitely. The one thing that I feel like I do want to say about that is not dying. It doesn't really contribute too much to that player getting points. As we saw, Reckless actually had a pretty weak fantasy season for the first half of last split, where he was kind of not dying, but his team wasn't doing anything, and he would have 2-0-3 or 1-0-1 every game. Not dying, more than anything, denies points to the other team. And so I think it'll be really interesting to watch a really aggressive Fnatic team that has scored a ton of points versus a really methodical, kind of tempered aggression team in SK Gaming. I'm wondering how those styles are... It's sort of the unstoppable force meets immovable object thing, and I wonder which one's going to crack.
Just correction, you said Fnatic. Reckless is on Elements now? Yeah.
Sorry, I was thinking of, last season he was playing for Fnatic. Yeah. Yes, this season he's on Elements. It is the question as to whether, which of these...
Yeah. But yeah, no. I definitely think that this lane's going to be very, actually, passive, I think, a little bit in the early game. It'll probably be passive lane, but I think the big difference is actually going to come from the 2 supports there. I think it's going to be between N-Rated and Nif, and I personally think N-Rated is much better than Nif, and think that might be what throws that battle in the favor of Forgiven, and probably the entire game to SK over Elements there.
I'm just going to devote a little bit more time to this bot lane, because they are kind of the 2 big bot lanes, really, of the LCS right now, it feels like. And what made Reckles so good is he's this super passive player, and Yellowstar is this extremely aggressive initiate support, and that seemed to gel perfectly. And you had kind of the opposite with Tabs and Nif, where Tabs is this super aggressive AD carry, and he was really the only aggressive member of that old Alliance squad. So now you have passive Reckles and passive Nif, and as we've seen from the last 2 weeks, they're both really strong players, but it doesn't seem to be the same level of dominance that we're used to really from either of those players in their bot lanes previously. Whereas Forgiven and Rated seems like just a perfect matchup, because Forgiven's this balls aggressive player, and N-Rated is this old smart support that's been around forever. So I have to agree that bot lane looks pretty good for Forgiven and N-Rated, actually, and I can't believe I'm saying that.
Compared to his first week, though, Reckless definitely stepped up his aggression. So I remember in in both of their games, he was a lot more active and he would dash forward and use his summoners aggressively, which was a major change from week 1. So I think Rekkles is making the shift that Elements needs in order to bring them to the top of the standings.
Yeah, while the bot lane matchup is the most interesting, I actually do think it's worth touching on Froggen versus WTFox because the talent gulf there is massive. WTFox has really been the sort of just there player of SK, and Froggen is still one of the premier mid laners of the LCS. Are we at all worried about Froggen just kind of taking control of this game? Because for me, that's Element's win condition.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It always feels like that's always Element's win condition, though. Like, it's always just like whatever team Froggen's been on, like CLG, EU, Alliance. It's always been like, hey, let's just get Froggen fed, or Froggen's gonna carry this game for us. But also, the way that you put that there about WTFox, it made me think about something. That was pretty much the same thought everyone had about Jesus and SK. Is this kind of like the thing that CLG does to top laners of what SK does to mid laners? Like, does it just make them kind of like maybe they're a very good mid laner, but just the play style of the team itself makes them appear worse than they really are?
I certainly don't see it as intentional, but when you have such a talented shot-calling support as N-rated, and such an unstoppable top laner as Freddy122, we saw at Worlds where, like, all of the bans against them, I think it was like 17 out of 18 bans, aimed at a top laner, and it wasn't even like, Maokai and Alistar, of course, but this was like Aatrox and Nidalee.
Aatrox every game, yeah.
So I feel like just because you have that talent there, you want a mid laner who's not going to be kind of going too aggressive in making those plays.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's gonna put your gold in weird places, where if your mid laner does make those plays, sure, you've got a little more gold mid, but you already had top and bot covered. Whereas if it fails, then you start worrying, hey, is the enemy mid laner going to be able to beat our already strong top laners and AD carries? I feel like it's kind of the same thing with CLG, where you want someone that can just fill that slot and not make mistakes, so that Doublelift can do what Doublelift does.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on from what's probably the biggest game of next week. Lynn, what's your game of the week for Europe?
I think Fnatic versus Unicorns of Love should be a very interesting matchup. I think for Unicorns of Love, in order for them to win, Power of Evil really needs to be able to carry, and Vardags needs to make it at least even in lane, so he can't give up too many kills. Vardags and Steelback both tend to pick up a lot of kills and a decent number of assists. However, one significant difference is that Vardags tends to give up a lot more deaths, both in lane and even in mid-game and then late game. So I expect to see high point values, especially for the Fnatic team. However, on the other side, on the other hand, Reignover seems like he typically gives up a lot more deaths than junglers usually do. Just in week 2, he gave up 12, I believe, deaths, and they're not necessarily game-changing deaths, but it's definitely something to look out for, because that really gives Unicorns of Love the opportunity to pick up a gold advantage, and it gives us the opportunity to pick up some more fantasy points.
Yeah, I've been loving watching Reignover because he like goes in and dies, and you're like, yes, Fnatic gets another team fight after this.
Yeah.
His deaths are typically they're not the ones where it's right before Fnatic is trying to secure an objective, so it's not a major problem. However, just it's the point value that's it's really making an impact on Fantasy League. Yeah. I will probably mostly be looking at the mid lane, because if Power Evil doesn't get an early lead, doesn't get ganks, and he doesn't snowball, Unicorns of Love can't really depend on their ADC. Their ADC is a very stable laner who picks up a lot of CS throughout the game, but he's not the most aggressive one. So I won't expect him to be making any game-changing plays.
Yeah, I think the same definitely goes for their top laner, Vizicsacsi, who really seems like he relies on his core champions, especially Gnar. So it feels like a lot of that does come down to Power of Evil. However, Power of Evil has actually played against Febiven many, many times in Challenger Series, and Power of Evil was always the mid laner to win. There were especially in the moments that counted. And so I feel like there's a reasonable possibility of Power Evil taking an advantage. I think the question is what Unicorns of Love does with it, because they haven't really shown strong control once they are in the lead, just because their other players are all a little bit more inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Something I also noticed was that, going back to the point that Reignover gives up a lot of deaths, often those deaths aren't just, some of them are when he dies for free, but oftentimes he dies and then one of his teammates pick up a few kills. So it might actually be worth it if Reignover dies and then someone else gets to pick up a kill after he's gotten one of the champions already low. Especially if that happens for mid lane, that could be making the difference for Fnatic and for Febiven if he's not, if Febiven can't mechanically outplay Power of Evil in lane.
What I think is most interesting about this matchup is both teams give up a ton of fantasy points. So I can't help but feel that even though Fnatic is likely the favorite, Unicorns of Love players maybe shouldn't be counted out as valuable fantasy picks, especially Kikis and Power of Evil.
Yeah, I definitely think Unicorns of Love have a very good week coming up because Fnatic loves team fighting, and team fights usually net more fantasy points for both teams. And then Unicorns of Love next game that week is going to be Gambit Gaming, and we usually know how teams do against Gambit.
Yeah,
I think Gambit can still come back later in this, but we'll have all that.
I can't count Diamond Procs out, but I certainly don't want to put any money on that right now.
Yeah.
For me, the game is definitely Rocket versus Meet Your Makers. I know it's not as high profile a match as those other two. Where those four teams probably are, the top four teams in Europe, Meet Your Makers is sitting at the very bottom of the barrel, only really ahead of Gambit. And Roccat has, despite a lot of hype, struggled to really do anything. But Meet Your Makers' star mid laner from last split, Selfie, now known as Corey, is returning to the squad. So I think they'll have sharper play calling and also more aggressive impact out of mid lane. I think what is important to watch is just that matchup between Corey and Nukeduck, because what we've seen from Meet Your Makers is they like to play really aggressively, which really only works if they're even or ahead everywhere, and that worked last season because they had such a strong jungler in Impaler. Horo has not had the same impact, and Selfie, not being there has meant that they haven't been able to get that sort of snowball that they're used to. But with the new mid laner, I think it just comes down to, can he outplay Nukeduck? On the other hand, Roccat has kind of struggled to do anything, so it's really important for them to secure this win just to remain even in consideration of middle top tier teams. What do you think about the bot lane? Because Mr. Rollas was actually a really strong AD carry last split, and Woolite was good in Copenhagen Wolves' wins, but not so much in their losses. Lynn?
I'm actually not expecting too much action from the bot lane, just because I feel like with their mid laners being so mechanically strong, I feel like the junglers are more likely to invest more resources there, whether it be in ganks and vision coverage. But I think mechanically they're pretty even. So, Chris?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the mid lane thoughts. I think whoever Rockat's coaches will see that Corey or Selfie is going to be coming back and will say, hey, we need Nukeduck to win this lane, just shut down Meet Your Makers, because they've seen Meet Your Makers play without really a mid laner in Blizer, or just a weaker mid laner in Blizer, and they are fine with going up against those Meet Your Makers rather than the Meet Your Makers with a pretty decently fed Selfie or Corey.
So I'm going to ask for some bold predictions. Jankos, he is the First Blood King of Europe. Will he get First Blood in this game, and what lane will it be in?
Ooh.
I don't think he'll get First Blood, but I think he'll get an assist on it, and I think he'll be in mid lane.
I think he actually won't get First Blood. I think First Blood's going to be from a roam down from mid lane into bot lane, actually. I'm going to say, I think it's going to be, Corey coming down for first blood in bot lane.
Okay, so we're either going to see we think aggressive play out of Corey or aggressive play directed at Corey. Really, he's going to be the linchpin of that game, one way or another. Let's go ahead and hop across the pond into North America. What do you think? Oh, sorry. What do you think the big games in North America are, Chris?
North America, I think a big game is Gravity versus CLG. We have Gravity, who a lot of people, like I'm going to say myself included, saying they aren't really deserving of the top spot in NA where they have it right now because they've had probably one of the easiest schedules so far. And they're playing against another one of the top teams in NA with CLG, who's also 3-1. It'll be interesting to see how that matchup plays out and see if Gravity playing against probably their first real competition of NA and see how that plays out, see if they're actually worthy of that top spot. It'll also be very good to see the rematch of CLG versus Curse Academy. That was in relegations.
Right. So
get to see, I think the bot lane will probably be the point of interest here with Cop Bunny Fufu versus Doublelift and Aphromoo. Doublelift and Aphromoo have been playing, Aphromoo specifically has been playing extremely well.
His Morgana play was exquisite.
Yeah.
So was his Blitzcrank, but
yeah, the Blitzcrank
every time Aphromoo touches a support, it looks pretty good.
Yeah. I've been hearing people call that the Ballista.
The Ballista. Yeah. Oh my gosh. but
I didn't know you could do that actually. The grab and then pull Blitz back to pull them even farther. That was so cool.
Yeah. I thought they fixed that with the Thresh, but I guess you could still just do that with Callista, because it's not an action that Blitzcrank does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely like to see that bot lane matchup. See if any bans get directed to the bot lane. Probably Callista, but do any of the supports get bans? Do you ban Thresh from Bunny Fufu? Do you ban any of the supports at Aphromoo? I just want to see how the two teams play around their bot lanes and see how that game plays out from there.
So for me, what's interesting about this game is not pick ban phase. I actually think this will be a clear victory for CLG. Maybe there will be egg on my face for this. But the teams Gravity has beaten thus far. Team Coast. And as we know, no one earns a win from Team Coast. They just wait for Team Coast to lose the game. Dignitas. I'm going to move on from Dignitas. and Cloud9, who's really been hurting in this early part of the season. So I feel like they haven't faced a real test yet, whereas CLG, we saw them beat for Team Impulse, which has at least a lot of talent on their roster, even if they haven't had the longest time together. Then they've taken down the same C9 that Gravity does. But in addition, they took down Team 8, which has looked pretty solid. And their only loss was to Team Liquid, who looked pretty much unstoppable during their first week. So CLG feels to me to have had a slightly harder schedule. It hasn't been, I feel like both those teams have had a relatively easy schedule. Mm-hmm. But I feel like at the end of this week, we're not going to be thinking of it as a top 3 teams between CLG, Gravity, and TSM. I think TSM is really going to pull ahead of the pack, just because they now have their easy part of the schedule.
Yeah.
Do you think Team 8, Team Impulse, Team Liquid, or Winter Fox can catch up? Or do you think TSM will pull out 2 wins and they'll be the clear leader after
I think there's almost no chance that TSM doesn't pick up 2 wins. They might lose to Impulse. And then on the other hand, Winter Fox, for example, matches up against CLG and Team 8, both of whom have looked pretty strong. Team 8 matches up against Cloud9, who I'm secretly hoping will recover, and Winter Fox. Team Liquid actually has the strongest chance, I think, of putting up another 2-0 and really pulling themselves ahead because they face Coast and Dignitas. But I just feel like right now Gravity hasn't done anything to earn the acclaim that they have, especially with they recently fired I don't know, it just doesn't, they seem like they're in an odd position. I'd rather wait before I hop on that hype train.
Yeah.
I think the matchup that I'll be watching for NA this week will be CLG against Winter Fox. I think top lane should be especially interesting, especially during laning phase. On one hand, we have Avalon, who's more of a support tanky top laner who typically racks up a lot of assists, and then we have Zion Spartan on the other hand. He's very good at picking up kills, and he's very good at making game-changing plays. He's less of a support and definitely more of a carry-styled top laner. We typically see him on a lot more fighters and mages for constant damage output. So I think Avalon probably won't be doing too well in lane, but he might still be able to make an impact mid and late game, if assuming they make it there. On the other side of the map, we have bot lane, which is Doublelift against Altec. Doublelift usually gets a lot of their team's resources, while Altec is usually left alone while Pobelter is getting those 4-man ganks. So I think Altec will be able to safely farm up, and he's going to be picking up quite a few kills in mid-game, as he has been doing in the past. He's typically not the one who's snowballing from early game, but in mid-game when his team are fighting, he's always able to pick up a few kills and a lot of assists. So, while on the other hand, Doublelift, his team is more relying on him to carry the game. I think if Doublelift can snowball hard enough, then he and Link should be able to carry the game, but I think Winter Fox has a pretty good chance in this matchup. In mid lane, it's Link. He's been doing a lot better compared to last split, at least. However, he hasn't been pulling off very many kills in mid lane without the assistance of their jungler. And with Pobelter receiving so much jungle support, and sometimes even having the support go with them, we'll have to see how Link can fare.
So what's interesting to me about this matchup is Zion Spartan versus Avalon. Because when you think Zion Spartan, we said this last week, you think Jax. You think split pushing. You think he's on his own, he's not going to get very much in the way of fantasy stats. In his game, I believe it was last week, he was Sion against actually I don't remember which team, but he started 0-3-1. And then all of a sudden he started like teleporting in, joining team fights, had a huge impact, and it wasn't the Zion Spartan that we're used to seeing. It was like this kind of passive laning Zion Spartan who's just joining team fights and actually affecting his team in a more direct way. And for me, that's actually a smarter, more mature Zion Spartan. So he's always been a talented top laner. I think he's getting more intelligent, whereas Avalon is just fresh into the competitive scene. And I think that's going to come back to bite him. The other matchup for me where there's a huge imbalance is Glebe versus Aphromoo. Because, I mean, Aphromoo is just one of the most mechanically talented supports in the game.
Aphromoo is willing to try a lot of things. Yeah, Glebe he's a stable, solid player, but
like Aphromu's skill shots in the past 3 games at least have just been insane. Like, I feel like Glebe's going to be like, I'm going to go ward this bush, and then somehow he's going to get blitzhooked by Aphromoo, and then also Dark Binding by Aphromoo, and you're going to be like, what? He's only playing one champion. How did that happen? I can't really see.
He's that good.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, both supports, because we've seen in this meta, there's not a lot of 2v2 matchups. Both of the supports are going to be able to have a big impact on top lane, a big impact on mid lane, and even a big impact on bottom lane, like both laning and roaming and ganking. And I feel like the impact that Aphromoo is able to have throughout the game will end up being a small advantage to just every lane. And as you mentioned, Winter Fox is used to avoiding bot lane, kind of just let Altec farm up, be that presence. We even saw them go for the weird Morgana Lulu Janna comp, where they were just like, we're just going to let Altec farm and then we'll win late game. And they just lost everywhere. And Altec wasn't really able to do anything because they put all their pressure onto Altec, and he fell behind. So when you've got a team like CLG that really likes to focus on their AD carry, I feel like that's going to be hard for Altec to come out of. So for me, that's another clear win for CLG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
in the last few games, sorry, go ahead.
All right, I think the actual, my personal matchup for this game would probably be Link versus Pobelter. You have, I think most of CLG's games where they're going to be facing, a talented mid lane player, I think most of the focus is going to be on Link versus that talented mid lane player. Because you're just waiting for Link to see if he's going to come back to, the end of last season, end of every season, every split Link where he fails, or if he's going to continue being this not really dominant, but really, really talented force that he's been doing for so far the past 4 games. And I think that Pobelter is going to be a nice challenge for him, because Pobelter, as people have seen, and if they've ever watched his stream or just ever paid attention to League of Legends, really is one of the most talented mid laners right now. He sometimes goes on tilt though, so I'm pretty sure that Helios and Xmithy and Aphromoo and Glebe are all going to be running mid lane to swing that lane into their favor. And so that's probably going to be a nice 3v3 mid lane with whatever top lane and bottom lane are going to be doing.
Yeah, Pobelter was very good at capitalizing on his opponent's mistakes, but Link, at least this season, he hasn't been making very many. So I could actually see mid lane being a low point value fantasy points compared to some of the other lanes. I think top should definitely be an interesting lane to watch, but bot lane, I think one team will come out very well. The other team will probably be scoring very minimal points.
Okay. Well, again, you guys seem to have picked 2 matches between these really dominant teams. I'm going to go with Coast versus Cloud9 for my matchup of the week, because apparently all I care about is sleepers. And Cloud9 are now sleepers because we're in horrible world.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a must-win game for both teams, because their strengths and weaknesses are so diametrically opposed that if they can't win in this matchup, it doesn't bode well for them. On the one hand, we have Cloud9, who is known for having kind of a weak early game, but a strong laning phase and rotational phase. They tend to win the lane swap. Balls has been an average of 40 CS up on his lane opponents. So that part you would feel like is a very Cloud9 thing, but we also know Cloud9 tends to die a lot more than other teams early game, and Team Coast has been really snowballing all of their games. They've had really high kill levels. Chris has been putting up insane fantasy points as a result. And so that seems like a perfect position for Coast to say, hey, we can snowball, we can win this. Other hand, Cloud9 is a team that's known for being really hard to put the final nail in the coffin. They kind of just stick around forever, they take small objectives, they give things up when they have to, and they are the masters of team fights. And so I think what you're going to end up with is Coast wanting to play aggressively and trying to snowball, while Cloud9 tries to back off of that and reassert teamfight dominance. And to me, whichever team can't do that correctly, you have to feel is not a good investment really for the rest of the season. From a skill perspective. From a fantasy perspective, Team Coast seems like they're just going to put up good points no matter what. They put up good points in their wins, they put up good points in their losses, they lose their wins, they win their losses. Nothing really makes sense when Coast is playing. For me, the matchup that really matters is bot lane, as far as fantasy goes, because Sneaky has been the only not awful fantasy part of Cloud9.
He's played really consistently, whether Cloud9 wins or loses.
Exactly. Sorry, he's now Mash Me, not Don't Mash Me.
Is he just Mash now?
He's just Mash now? Oh, okay.
I think so.
Well, he was the, He was one of the lowest rated AD carries coming into the draft. I know this because I was able to just pick him up like round 10 in so many drafts. He's actually been the number 2 scoring AD carry, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
For someone that's on a team that no one would have expected, it's kind of insane. Sorry, he's number 3 behind Steelback and Reckles. We can't really count Keith McBrief just because it was the 1 week.
Yeah.
But for me, Sneaky has to come up with some advantage in that lane. And contrary to what I want to be true, I actually see MASH winning that matchup. I think MASH feels like a solid investment here, just because Cloud9 seems to be struggling and Coast is the perfect team to take advantage of that. All the other lanes don't seem particularly exciting to me. There's been low fantasy points out of Balls, but he's been getting good... he's not been losing lane, he just hasn't been doing anything. And really the same goes for everyone but High, and Jess's is kind of the weak point, fantasy-wise, of Team Coast. So I don't feel like there are any matchups where Team Coast just straight up dominates Cloud9, but I do feel like their general early pressure will push them into winning the game. I think Coast is a good fantasy pick overall, but because of those stylistic differences, I don't think Coast is actually going to put up good fantasy points this week, especially versus Cloud9.
I think both teams will have a hard time putting up good fantasy points, at least in this matchup, just because I feel like Coast is going to try to pick fights or try to make moves around the map, and Cloud9 is just going to be like, okay, if you want top, we'll go bot and we'll take a turret bot. So I really see them trading a lot of objectives, and the teams might be scoring high fantasy points, but as for the individual players, I don't think it'll be very action-packed.
Yeah, just going off of something you said earlier, I was saying how this is like a must-win game for both teams. I think it's mostly just a must-win game for Cloud9. I don't see, like, if Cloud9 loses this game, I don't see much of a comeback in the faith of their fans, the faith of the team itself, and just, like, they're going to be, at best, 2-4 off of that, and the rest of the league is going to be pulling ahead, with TSM probably going to be 5-1. You're going to have CLG either 5-1, 4-2 most likely. Team Liquid 4-2, and like, yeah, it's a couple of weeks to get back into that, but still, you're going to be falling further and further behind, especially losing to a team like Team Coast, where they have zero rotational play, and Cloud9's known for having all the rotational play that they've been known for.
Right, so I guess where Cloud9 suffers here is in expectations.
Yeah.
Maybe the game feels equally important to me for both teams, but no one will be disappointed if Coast takes home 6th place.
Mm-hmm.
For even I think their organization, that's great. They came through the challenger scene. They've never really placed above like 7th before, so for them to take 6 out of 10 would be sort of a huge success for the team, whereas for Cloud9 to take that same 6th place would be a massive failure for the team that has never finished the season outside of 1st place.
Cloud9 has always been a stable team before, a stable, really consistent team before, but do you think the pressure now could be getting to them, as they're still in the bottom of the standings when it comes to week 2?
I'm going to go against my gut and my head and just go with what I want. I feel like Cloud9 can do this. They have more experience, and I really want them to win. But I think it's a real possibility, yeah, that they have sort of had like fractured confidence, that they're facing a stronger scene than they've ever been in before, and that adapting to that may prove too hard or too little too late. But from a fantasy perspective, I think that sort of helps them. They do pretty well fantasy-wise in their losses compared to other teams. So I just don't see them as a team that you want to draft, because the only time in which they outperform other players is the time in which they're scoring, loss points, which are so low that...
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like you're going to have a higher average score overall, but when they put up points are going to be the weeks that you're losing. And when they do win, they're not going to have the same sort of edge that you'd expect from a team that's better
team.
at that.
Mm-hmm.
So would you be putting Cloud9 on your starting roster this week, or benching them? Because you sound like you wouldn't be dropping them.
I would never have drafted Cloud9 in the first place. I've made that very clear.
Yeah, I would have probably only drafted Sneaky, and
Sneaky
I'd keep Sneaky playing. I'd keep Sneaky playing as probably a flex pick.
I guess I'm going against the grain because I have all 5 Cloud9 numbers, and I also
you picked them back up?
Yeah.
Cloud9 week 1, Teammate week 2, Cloud9 week 3. I think it should be telling that when you dropped the entirety of Cloud9, no one picked them up. We're just like, So just a quick reminder of our schedule and stuff. We're going to be broadcasting every Monday and Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. Monday is going to be a recap of the previous week, and Wednesday will be a preview of the next week with questions. So now let's just go into potential sleeper matchup. Like potential sleepers and or matchups of the week. Who is your top sleeper player pick for this week?
Mine is
sleeper player.
Definitely Bunny Fufu, because no one's really counting on him to do well. However, he gives very few deaths, and he picks up a lot of assists. I don't have the exact percentage, but he's doing really well on that. And something that I find with him is that he's always at the right place at the right time. So if there's a fight starting, he will be there, and he'll find a way to pick up quite a few assists. And on Thresh, he's often the one who's making the plays. So I expect him to do well, whether or not Gravity wins or loses their games this week.
It does appear that Bunny Fufu is available in one of my leagues. I've got Nif, but he's been struggling. Might have to consider that.
Yeah, I'd probably take Bunny over Nif for this week at least.
No, Bunny Fufu's matchups are not the greatest either, but... Anyway, what's your sleeper of the week, Chris?
My sleeper of the week, probably... I'd go with Slushy, actually. He's surprised everybody, actually. People were counting him out as probably the worst player on Teammate, and especially in the TSM game, he played insanely well, and just in the other games throughout that Teammate has played, they continued having team fights as much as possible throughout the games, and he'd be able to pick up assists even in their losses. So I think Slushy would be able to put up solid amount of fantasy points for anyone that needs something for mid lane or flex in case they have rough matchups coming up.
I'm going to be extremely predictable in saying that my sleeper pick this week is Airwax once again. Copenhagen Wolves tend to put up good points in their wins and awful points in their losses. And Airwax had a pretty solid week 1, as we saw against, I believe it was Meteor Makers and H2K. I'm not positive, but it was 2 low-level teams. And the next week, they had horrible matchups. And he put up a whopping 10 points last week. So this week, he faces off against Gambit Gaming, which is just fantasy gold for anyone who plays against them. And then Unicorns of Love, who we've seen struggle a little bit, at least to be like this dominant team that it's supposed to be. So I'm not saying that, you know, this is Copenhagen's time to shine. They're gonna 2-0 this week. They're gonna be the number 3 team in Europe. But I think he'll make a solid sleeper pick, and he's very likely to be open in every league you're in.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. Airwax last year definitely had led the charge in Copenhagen Wolves' games. He got a ton of kills. I think he led junglers in kills at one point, even though he didn't play every game that Copenhagen Wolves played. But his downside for that was that he got a bunch of kills, but he died a lot. But the way that Fantasy LCS works is if you get a kill and a death every time, you still get 1.5 points from that. So He's really good at fantasy, even if he isn't the best jungler. And he's not, but yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of name game. That's where people have sent us in Twitter or Twitch questions as to who to start between 2 given players at the same position. The first one comes to us, and it is Chris or Freddy122 in the top lane?
Definitely Freddy122. He's been picking up kills surprisingly. The team that he has, and he's also been picking up a lot of assists for each kill that one of his carry gets. Chris, on the other hand, seems like he does not horribly when they lose, but when they and he does really well when they win. But I think we've made it clear that they might be able to pick up a win against C9, but against Team Liquid, I don't see them winning that game. So okay. I would definitely take Freddy.
I'm gonna cut you guys off. I didn't want to do it now because I did something. I'm gonna cut you off after one sentence. We're just gonna power through these.
All right,
Chris, Chris or Freddy?
I'll go with Freddy. He's definitely looking really strong, and as we said, Coast has a pretty tough schedule this week.
I'm gonna be a rebel here and go with Chris just because he's put up 23 points per game compared with Freddy's 18. Even if he does have a bad week, that seems solid to me. Okay, next we have a question about junglers. Which of these two junglers would you start? Kikis or Lulex?
I'll go with Kikis. Unicorns of Love is probably going to be my sleeper team, so to say. I'm not sure how many people are sleeping on them because of the hype, but right. Kikis is all the way.
I'll actually go with Lulex here, just because HUK is playing against Gam, and I expect Lulex to be able to pick up some points even in their game against SK.
That is brave. I'm going with Kikis, but that is a solid stand, and I can respect that. We have another jungler question, actually. Shook or Impaler?
Impaler. Shook doesn't score enough points, and Elements plays against SK, who denies the most points out of any team in Fantasy LCS.
I agree for the exact same reasons, so.
I'm gonna go with Impaler. I went with Chris. I kind of have to go with Impaler. Right? I just feel like Elements is gonna have a rough week. So I think we just all agreed for the first time. That's awesome. Moving to mid lane. These two players are matched up against each other, so it does make it an interesting prediction. Ooh. Froggen versus Jesses.
Matched up against each other? Jesses is on Coast now.
Oh! They're not matched up against each other. It's really boring.
Just in general, like a trend that I've been noticing is North American mid laners have been scoring more points. And Froggen still isn't a very aggressive mid laner. He often loses to summoners defensively, so I don't see him picking up too many points.
Froggen. Froggen scores probably the most points per game out of mid laners, or at least some of the highest points per game. Very, very consistently scores 22 points every game, so Froggen.
I know I've gone with Team Coast for the last two, but I have to go with Froggen. He's been one of the most consistent fantasy players, both this split and the previous split. We have another question about mid lane. Febiven or Froggen?
Gonna have to go with Bevan. He has an easier week this week. He doesn't have to play SK, and Froggen has to play SK.
Yeah, just because SK is good at denying points, I think Febiven would probably be a better pick for Fantasy LCS.
Yeah, that seems a pretty simple one to conclude on me as well. Febiven, he's just been really, really incredibly dominant in almost all of his games. And finally, one more mid lane question. Power of Evil or Phoenix?
I'll start. I'll go Power of Evil. As I said, Unicorns of Love have had a tough schedule already. It's getting a little bit easier. Power of Evil.
Lynn?
I agree. I think Power of Evil will end up scoring more points. And I've yet to see how Phoenix will do. So I think my opinion will maybe change after this week, depending on how Team Liquid does this week. But
I actually don't. I know we did our player power rankings. I don't remember how I matched these two players, but I think I would go with Phoenix over Power of Evil just because I am predicting the 2-0 for Liquid, and I'm sort of hoping for them to bounce back to their week 1 level, whereas, yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Now down to bot lane, we have a question about AD carries. The first one we answered earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and pose it anyway. Rekkles or Forgiven?
Forgiven.
Forgiven.
Hang on a second. Who has Rekkles and Forgiven on their team? Okay.
That is crazy. Actually, but no one.
Maybe they're drafting this week. Okay.
Or they
maybe people didn't. Maybe people didn't pick up SK, Forgiven. So. Yeah.
It could be someone drafting this week or something. I don't know.
Could be. But yeah, Forgiven.
Rekkles has been scoring. He did score a lot more points. Week 2. We'll see if he can continue that trend.
Okay, we have our first 3-person question. So.
Fun.
Well then, I didn't study for this one.
I know. Apollo, Maple Street, or Mr. Rallis?
Ooh, that's actually a very tough one.
Right? That's the best one. All the other ones have been pretty simple for me. This is...
Oh man, I'm gonna...
Remember, Apollo is Wiz Fusion, in case you forgot.
Yeah. And then good old Wiz.
I think I would take Mr. Rallis. EU has been scoring a lot more points this week. 5 or 6 EU players. So I think... And I think Mr. Rallis...
I think you're cutting out just a little bit.
Oh, am I? The teams he's playing aren't the most difficult. Elements is very good. But they're also playing against Rocket, and I think they should be able to pull off the win. So we'll have to see.
I don't think Apollo's going to be. I think Apollo's going to be the worst of the 3 there. He did play really well last week, but I think it might end up being Maple Street. I'm going to go along with a Slushy pick, say like that teammate's going to end up having a lot of team fights, and Maple Street's going to pick up kills and assists from all these team fights.
I am very, very tempted to just be a contrarian here and say Apollo. And for any other week I would, but actually Team Impulse faces Gravity and TSM, so I'm going to go with Maple Street as well. I don't think we have any questions about support, which is lame, so I'm going to make one up. Actually, nope, there's nothing in the Twitch chat about support. Okay. We've hyped up Bunny Fufu a bunch. And we've also talked a good deal about Aphromoo. But we haven't really mentioned Sheep. Aphromoo, Sheep, or Bunny Fufu?
Mash was the highest scoring ADC, and Sheep being his support, I feel like Sheep has a good chance. However, I'm going to pick what I think is a logical pick and go with Aphromoo. He has double lift. CLG likes throwing all of their players towards bot lane, and those Aphromoo buttons though. So yeah, I'll go that way.
I think Sheep has the potential to get more points than any of the 3, but I definitely pick Aphromoo of those 3 because he's going to probably consistently get you like a ton more points than, like, he'd probably average out as more points for this week than, I don't know if you're following that or not.
Yeah, I think for consistency, I would also have to go with Aphromoo. Just because he has an easier schedule this week. I think maybe over the season, Sheep might get more points. Just because Coast seems to have a very aggressive style. Okay, well, we've gone through all the positions. If anyone has any other questions for the next... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There are a couple in Twitch chat right here. I can read them off.
Go ahead. They're not showing. That's...
Okay. You have a jungle question on Saint or Lulex here.
Lulex scored a lot of points this week. Sticking with the EU trend, I feel like EU is going to do well, and Saint tends to go on tilt now and then. I find a little bit scary, especially against Team Impulse and CLG. So, Lulex.
I'm I'm gonna also side with Lulex just because he did really well in H2K's 2 wins last week, and I think that might continue this trend a little bit. Even if H2K only gets 1 win this week, he'll still probably get more points than Saint.
I think only because Saint has not done very well overall. I have to go with Saint Vicious. Even if their team does pull off a 2-0, Saint has only averaged 14.76 points per game, despite going 3-1. Lulex is 2-2, and he's still getting 19 points per game. So even if they both go 1-1, which it looks like they probably will, even if Saint goes 2-0, he has to perform better than he's been playing just to even out. So I think Lulex is probably the stronger pick.
All right. Next question's AD carry. We got Doublelift or Wild Turtle?
I'd be confident with Doublelift. I don't think Wild... I think Wild Turtle is a pretty stable player, but I also don't think he's the one who's making too many plays, and he doesn't always seem to be there when fights break out. So, sticking with Doublelift.
I like this question this week because it seems like TSM has an easy 2-0, but even with that 2-0, I think Doublelift outperforms Wild Turtle. Wild Turtle's very streaky when it comes to playing AD carry, and you don't really want a streaky player because it's hard to predict what they're going to do, and when you can't really predict how well they're going to do, it can negatively impact your team.
So, as far as points per game go, they are 0.04 points per game apart. However, I think the question comes down to matchups. We're predicting maybe a difficult 2-0 for Cloud9 and a relatively easy 2-0 for TSM, but I think it's important to note what team TSM is playing against, and that is Dignitas. Yes, Dignitas has been a free win for most people, but they pretty much they follow the patented strategy of continue to roll over back, no, we don't want this outer turret, we don't want this inner turret, we don't want this inhib turret, we don't need the inhib, you can take it, still
we don't want a Nexus.
No, it's okay, go right ahead and kill it. And teams do not score high fantasy points against Dignitas as a result. I think this is kind of just how Shifter plays. He's a very passive player. So I can't imagine Wild Turtle's going to get a ton of points in that game. I think it has to come down to Doublelift just because of that matchup.
Yeah. All right, we've got another three-part question. This is actually in support. So we've got Glebe, Sheep, or Hylissang.
I can't not go Sheep. I just can't. I've already said I put too much. I would be contradicting myself so hard if I were yeah, it's Glebe.
Glebe? All right.
No, Sheep.
Oh, Sheep. Oh, okay.
Sheep I feel like he has pretty hard matchups. I'm going to stray here, and I'm going to go Hylissang. I feel like both with Glebe and Sheep, they have rough matchups. I guess Winter Fox against Team 8 shouldn't be too bad for Winter Fox, but I feel pretty solid about Unicorns of Love versus Copenhagen Love, so I'm hoping Hylissang can pull off quite a few points there.
Yeah, I'm also thinking Hylissang. I think, again, I've been saying this all day, and Monday too, I think Unicorns of Love are going to have a good week this week, and Hylissang's going to be part of that, so Hylissang. We've got Balls, Chris, or Hauntzer.
You know my answer.
Yeah.
You know why I'm here.
Yeah. I think I'm going to say Chris. Balls shouldn't even be mentioned with Chris or Hauntzer. And Chris is probably not solid 10 points over Hauntzer too.
I mean, we can just look at stats from overall right now, and Chris is putting up 23 points per game, and to compare that to other roles, that would be third place if he were a mid laner. If he were an AD carry, that would be fourth-ish place. So, I just can't see comparing any top laner that isn't Huni to Chris. Huni, of course, putting up 29
scored 22 points 22. He's been scoring 22 points per game, so SK has a good top laner too.
Freddy's at 18, I think.
Oh, he's at 18. He might be that for average, but I think he put out better points week 2.
Week 2 he did a lot better.
Question. I want to say Hunter until I remember that he's playing in Zion Spartan from CLG. So I'll go with Chris. I'll agree with.
We've got another one. Another Hauncer. Hauncer or Cali Trolls.
I think
this is much more equal.
Yeah, Teammate. Well, I mean, I feel like Teammate has rough matchups, and I don't think they'll score too many points if they're losing. So.
I'm gonna be a rebel and say Cali Trolls. No explanation.
You just give up Cali Trolls.
I have Cali Trolls as my top laner in both my leagues because I just neglected to pick up top laners.
You're welcome.
And he's been doing really well, or at least better than I was expecting from him.
I feel like I should explain, maybe.
That could be helpful.
Teammate has good matchups, and I called CLG beating Gravity, so that's enough for me.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I like Cali Trolls mostly because he's the one that makes plays on Teammate. And Teammate always tries to, unlike Dignitas, they always try to at least come back into the game even if they're losing. So it might net you a little bit more negative points if they're getting completely crushed, but if it's an even or slightly less than even game, Teammate's going to fight back and gain more points, and it's going to be off of Cali Trolls doing something.
Okay. Do we have any other questions in the Twitch?
I think there's one last one. Soren or Corey? Which is...
Go ahead, Lynn.
I would go with Soren just because I realize that Corey Selfie is a good player mechanically, but with just the problems with his team and everything, I feel like it's a lot easier for him to go on tilt if he has like a bad early game. And I think Soren should be able to pull off a decent number of points considering he's going against Gambit. So.
I think I would pick Corey, mostly because if you're stuck choosing between Soren or Corey, you'd probably just want to pick the one that has the higher ceiling, so to say, and I think Corey definitely has the higher ceiling for points this week.
For this week, I would go with Soren. He's got easier matchups, Unicorns of Love and Gambit Gaming, versus Elements and Roccat. But for the long run, I would actually grab Corey, because sure, Soren might outscore Corey by I don't know, let's say I'm right and it's 5 points this week. Copenhagen Wolves does not have an upside. This is a team that has been last place in Europe. I think they are just trying to become the best relegation team there is. Because they've played in every EU LCS relegation there has been, and they've won every EU LCS relegation they've been in. I think they just like that revolving door thing, and there just doesn't seem to be the same sort of potential that there is for Corey to kind of return to their team's former glory. So I would say grab Corey just to secure him.
Yeah.
Or just drop him on your bench for now and play Soren. If you have both of them, play Soren.
If you have both Soren and Corey, you messed up somewhere in your draft.
Yeah, if you get stuck with... you get stuck with those two.
Maybe they pick Nip first, and then by the time they were picking mids, all
shots fired. That hurts. Nip was a good pick.
Yeah, I think he'll turn out to be a good pick.
No. Okay. Well, it looks like that's all of our questions. Just again, a reminder, you can go ahead and tweet us at FantasyRiftCom. I guess you could also ask questions on our Facebook page. And we'll go ahead and be doing a show every Monday and Wednesday at 7 p.m. Thanks for tuning in, and go ahead and send us your questions for the next show.